Regulations on big businesses, especially their governance and shareholder rights, to make the economy fairer. President Moon, on his trip through Southeast Asia, heads to Laos, a first for a Korean leader. He'll be looking to strengthen cooperation with Laos in a range of areas, including development and infrastructure. And China says it's reached a deal with the U.S. to resume trade negotiations early next month. As yet unconfirmed, but that sent Wall Street futures soaring. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. President Moon Jae-in visits Laos today following his trip to Myanmar. And there he's going to look for ways to boost bilateral ties with Laos and also with the greater Mekong region. Our Park Hee-jun has this report.
President Moon Jae-in completes his ASEAN tour with his final stop, Laos. After visiting Thailand and Myanmar earlier this week, President Moon arrives in Laos on Thursday for an unprecedented visit by a South Korean leader.
The trip to Laos between September 5th and September 6th is the first state visit by a South Korean president. We anticipate the two countries will strengthen cooperation in development, infrastructure, agriculture, and health care, while accelerating South Korea-Mekong cooperation by revealing our vision in the country which contains the greatest length of the Mekong River.
With a population of around 7 million, Laos has a GDP of $18.5 billion as of 2018. Dubbed the Battery of Asia for its abundant water resources from the Mekong River, Laos is attracting an increasing amount of foreign investment. And its economy maintains an annual economic growth rate in the 6% range. President Moon will hold a summit with his counterpart Bunyang Vorchith in the capital, Vientiane. They're to discuss ways to tighten their bilateral relations and to improve cooperation between Korea and ASEAN and between Korea and the Mekong region. And with Laos being a powerhouse for hydroelectric power, running 61 power plants and exporting 65% of its electricity to neighboring countries, the two sides are expected to seek stronger cooperation in that area. They will also sign MOUs on agriculture, ICT, and startups. And later in the day, when Moon visits the Mekong River, he will lay out a more detailed vision for relations between Korea and the Mekong region. That region includes countries like Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Vietnam. With his visit to Laos, President Moon fulfills his promise of visiting all ASEAN nations within his term. And as Laos is a relatively niche market, President Moon seeks to increase Korea's presence in the country, particularly by tapping into the infrastructure industry along the Mekong River. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News, Yangon.
Starting today, the Korean capital is hosting the annual Seoul Defense Dialogue. It's a gathering of experts and officials from dozens of countries who are looking at security issues related to the Korean peninsula. Kim Ji-yeon has more.
Building peace together, challenges and visions, that's the theme for this year's multinational security dialogue platform, the Seoul Defense Dialogue. Aimed at facilitating discussions on situations on the Korean peninsula and the surrounding region, as well as peacekeeping operations and cybersecurity, the 8th Vice Ministerial event held its opening ceremony in Seoul on Thursday. It serves as a platform to bring together hundreds of officials and experts from around 50 countries and 2 international organizations. In his keynote address, Seoul's Defense Minister Chung Kyung-do highlighted the achievements of the comprehensive military agreement signed almost 12 months ago in alleviating inter-Korean tensions. This despite the series of launches of short-range ballistic missiles by North Korea. He highlighted efforts to build mutual trust in the region through dialogue, while also saying South Korea's security strategy lies in achieving peace by building strong military strength and defense capabilities.
After the inter-Korean military agreement, during the past year, military guard posts have been removed from the inter-Korean border on the trial basis, while the disarmament of security guards at the joint security area in Panmunjom has been completed. Also, up until now, some 1,500 Korean war remains have been excavated in the DMZ.
He also highlighted the efforts to build mutual trust in the region through dialogue and raise security concerns, saying that neighboring countries near the peninsula, presumably Japan, are trying to trigger tensions. During the first plenary session on the peace process on the Korean peninsula and international cooperation, Vice Defense Minister Park Jae-min echoed Chung's remarks, underscoring the government's efforts to maintain the momentum of dialogue for denuclearization. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump has emphasized once again that he's not looking for regime change in North Korea and that he believes the North has tremendous economic potential. Answering questions from reporters at the White House on Wednesday, Trump lumped North Korea together with Iran, suggesting the possibility of striking a deal with them. Take a listen.
Tremendous potential. We're not looking for regime change. They have tremendous potential. And I think they're going to want to take advantage of that potential. I really believe that. I think North Korea is a country with tremendous potential, and I think they're going to want to take advantage of it. So we'll see what happens. But
those remarks are seen as a gesture to get the North back to the negotiating table amid a deadlock in the denuclearization talks, and with analysts saying time is not on Trump's side. At the G7 summit in France late last month, Trump also commented on the regime's potential while addressing questions on Iran. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is back in Beijing from his three-day visit to Pyongyang without having met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Pyongyang's state-run Korean Central News Agency reported Thursday that Wang met with Lee Soo-yong, a senior official in charge of international affairs for the North's ruling party, and asked him to pass on greetings from Chinese President Xi Jinping and his wife. Now, this might be a hint that Wang did not meet with Kim Jong-un. Observers say this could be because Wang's visit was strictly for working purposes to prepare for Kim's potential visit to China next month. The People's Republic of China celebrates its 70th anniversary on October 1st, and Pyongyang and Beijing celebrate the 70th anniversary of their diplomatic ties on October 6th. South Korea is seeking international cooperation on the issue of the radioactive water from Japan's crippled nuclear power plant at Fukushima. The country's Science Ministry and Nuclear Safety Commission on Thursday said they've sent a letter to the International Atomic Energy Agency citing concerns about damage to the marine environment. Reports have said Japan might be planning to discharge about 1 million tons of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. The South Korean government has vowed to continue to push the international community to find the best possible way to dispose of the water so that it does not burden future generations. When Japan hosts the Olympics next year, some Japanese fans might be tempted to wave the so-called rising sun flag, a symbol from the imperial era that's highly offensive to people throughout Asia. The International Olympic Committee, though, is suggesting it won't stop people from displaying it as long as it's not used for what they're calling political purposes. Our Won Jung-hwan reports.
South Korean broadcaster SBS has reported that the IOC has issued a response to an inquiry into the use of the rising sun flag at the upcoming Olympics in Tokyo. The IOC didn't specifically respond to the issue of banning the controversial flag during the event, but only said all Olympic stadiums should be free from political protest. It said that if the flag is used for political purposes, they will then respond accordingly. Such a response suggests the IOC won't stop Japanese fans from bringing rising sun flags into the stadium, leaving the controversial issue unsettled. The response matches the stance of the Tokyo Organizing Committee, which said it sees no reason to ban the flag during the event, explaining that the committee doesn't think it's inherently political. The rising sun flag was used by the Imperial Japanese Army during the World War II. And is a highly sensitive issue not only to South Korea, but also to other countries that were invaded by Japan. Meanwhile, the South Korean government is stepping up efforts to prevent the controversial flag from being taken into Olympic venues. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs said Japan needs to be more humble about owning up to its historical legacy and should know what the flag means to Japan's neighbors. And the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism said on Wednesday that a letter will be sent to the IOC to deliver Seoul's request. The letter that is being drafted intends to express the concerns of South Korea, China, and other Asian countries that the presence of a sign of Japanese imperialism will only be a reminder of their painful past. While it is yet to be determined who will send the letter, it is likely to be sent before the Chuseok holiday, which begins next Thursday. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
This week, Seoul is hosting a film festival centered around the theme of food. It's the 5th Seoul International Food Film Festival, and there'll be plenty of culinary delights that visitors can try while they enjoy the films. Lee Min-sun reports.
A festival satisfying all the senses kicks off this Friday in Seoul. The Seoul International Food Film Festival runs for 6 days at Seoul Namsan Gugakdang and the Daehan Cinema in Chungmu-ro. First held in 2015, the festival aims to explore various aspects of life and culture from around the world through the familiar media of food and film. The organizers also hope to raise awareness of sustainable and healthy eating. There will be a total of 67 feature films and shorts from around the world, along with plenty of things to do on the sidelines, like cooking and tasting events and guest speakers. It's meant to be a relaxing experience. This year's opening film is Food Fighter by Australian director Dan Goldberg. It's a documentary about the environmental problems caused when food goes to waste, while some people in Australia struggle to get enough to eat every day. The screening will be followed by a special reception called Australian Night to celebrate the country's food, film, lifestyle, and culture. And to mark the 100th anniversary of Korean film, they'll be showing some classic Korean films about food or related issues from the 1950s to the 1990s. It will be a chance to explore and understand the changes in Korean society and culture. The signature program is the so-called dining cinema, where audiences can watch movies and enjoy the food they feature. A total of 8 dining cinema programs are offered, serving Australian barbecue, French cuisine, Spanish and Korean dishes, along with beer, wine, or Korean liquor. Because there are a limited number of seats for these programs, those interested should make a reservation at the festival's website. Tickets for the dining cinema range from 15,000 to 30,000 won, which is about $12 to $25. Film directors, critics, and chefs will also give talks after the movie screenings, discussing various aspects of food, culture, healthy eating, and sustainability. And there are also free outdoor screenings at Namsangkol Hanok Village that show short documentaries and animated films. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
The Moon Jae-in administration has announced it's going to revise laws in a range of areas, such as corporate governance, to make the economy fairer. A fair economy is one of the administration's 3 key economic policies meant to support the country's sustainable growth. Kim Hae-sung reports.
The ruling party and the government have agreed to revise several statutes as part of efforts to accelerate the push for a so-called fair economy, one of the Moon administration's flagship economic policies that aims to improve corporate governance and address unfair market practices. Korea's Fair Trade Commission, the ruling Democratic Party, and 8 government ministries, including the Finance Ministry, said Thursday they have come up with a fair economy achievement plan after going through negotiations. Around 23 specific areas and 7 categories, such as corporate governance and corporate ownership, will be revised.
We will revise the law so corporate board of directors and shareholders' meetings are run competitively. We will strengthen rules related to corporate disclosure and circular shareholding structures.
The chief policymaker of the ruling Democratic Party said the government will also revise laws to boost expertise in the National Pension Fund system and strengthen shareholders' rights through a stewardship code aimed at encouraging firms to reform their governance. The government will soften a so-called 5% corporate disclosure rule in which an investor who owns 5% or more of the shares of a listed firm needs to report to the supervisory authorities when he or she sells more than 1% of the stocks. In addition, there will be measures to protect consumer rights in e-commerce and finance. To help level the playing field, measures will be included to improve partnerships between major conglomerates and subsidiary companies and improve payment systems for small companies. The ruling Democratic Party said it'll work closely with the government to pass the revisions by the second quarter of 2020. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
It's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at USChina Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you as always for coming on.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, today, the chief executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, officially withdrew the bill that would have allowed for the extradition of criminals to mainland China. This was a key demand of the protesters. So Hong Kong stocks are up. Wall Street also saw gains overnight. How's it looking today there and elsewhere?
Yes, as you said, Hong Kong's chief executive lady, Carrie Lam, reiterated on Thursday that controversial bill that led to mass protest will be fully withdrawn with no debate and no voting. This is definitely positive news for the global equity market as equity risk appetite is coming back. If you look at the announcement, the formal withdrawal of extradition bill has sparked months of mass protests that have turned increasingly violent in the past, and that has caused Hong Kong market and most of the global equity market to suffer with that uncertainties. But as one of the 5 demands by protesters is getting rid of this bill, which will occur, and that is definitely positive news for the global equity market. And because of this, U.S. equity market rose sharply yesterday, somewhere between 1 to 1.3%. European market also rebounded by 0.9%. And China, after a sharp rise yesterday, it continues to rise today by around 1 percentage point. Also, Japan was up sharply, 2.2%. Kospi also seems to be rising second days in a row, where Kospi was up 0.8% and Kosdaq was up 0.56%, which is showing that Kospi is breaking above the tough level of 2,000 mark.
Well, meanwhile, we have the Federal Reserve releasing its Beige Book for last month, showing growth is moderate in the U.S. economy, similar to the month before. Tell us more about what's in that report.
Yes, the U.S. economy expanded at a modest pace from June to August, despite the looming concerns about the U.S.-China trade war. Almost all the Fed's 12 districts reported modest growth over the past few months. And the Fed said that its reason-by-reason roundup of anecdotal information, known as the Beige Book, the report prepared by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis was based on information collected through the August 23rd. So clearly, these numbers are showing that trade concern is not really affecting that much for the time being. However, though, since the September, there's definitely additional tariff that's going through, which will cause the prices to go up for the consumers' consumption-related products. So therefore, that can be definitely negative news for the overall U.S. economic growth rate. So clearly still there's a concern between, so far the numbers seems to be fairly stable versus the additional tariff might cause U.S. economy to suffer quite sharply or quickly. Some of the manufacturing PMI numbers and some of the numbers that are coming through are showing that concern, while the labor numbers and the wage growth numbers seems to be fairly stable. So still there's a question mark whether how big this tariff increase is going to have impact on the U.S. economic growth rate. In my analysis, we think the impact can be quite significant unless the Fed lowers interest rate more aggressively. So we do anticipate that Fed will be lowering interest rate coming September 18th of this month.
Got it. Well, here in Korea, we've seen some remarkable numbers. Inflation at 0 last month, data show. That's causing concern we might be heading for deflation. But the government's planning an extra $2 billion roughly of extra spending in the second half of this year. What are they hoping will happen, and do you think it'll work?
Well, I've been saying that the Korean government needs to do a lot more than just coming out with this $2 billion injection of fiscal budget. If you look at the number, it's 2.6 trillion won, which is only 0.15% of GDP. And you already seen that the first quarter of GDP for Korea was the lowest level of 1.7%. And the second quarter, it was up but it's only 2%, which is far below U.S. or China growth rates. We think that this kind of only 0.15% of the fiscal additional budget is not enough. If you look at the government debt as percentage of GDP, it is only 40%. We think that there's significantly more room to boost the economy, but current ruling party versus opposition party, the tension continues, and the fight between these two are continuing to happen. So really, the economic policies are not coming through as speedy as I would expect or I would want. And we think that not just the fiscal policy, but additional monetary policy is needed. Current interest rate, BOK, is 1.5%. We think that number needs to go down to 1% or even below that. And with the GDP growth rate being only 2% or less, with the consumption inflation coming in at 0% for the previous month. So clearly, Korean government needs to do more than just this fiscal budget. We do hope that this will come through as the time passes. BOK action of the additional liquidity injection is likely to happen. So for the equity market of Korea, policies are moving in the right direction, but the speed and the size of the policy is not that satisfactory. So, which means that the momentum for the equity market can be fairly limited.
All right, Mr. Yu, got it. Thank you very much for your insights today. As always, we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, North Korea's Vice Premier Lee Yong-nam says the North wants to strengthen economic cooperation with Russia's Far East. Lee's in Vladivostok for the Eastern Economic Forum. The Far East region of Primorsky Krai said on its website that right after Lee got there on Monday, he met with the region's governor, Oleg Kozymyako. Lee said the North is now focusing on economic development and that prospects are bright for cooperation with Russia in the areas of construction, agriculture, fisheries, and tourism. Today, instead of attending the forum's plenary session, Lee will be meeting with other senior Russian officials. According to Chinese media, the U.S. and China have agreed to resume their trade talks in early October. It's been over a month since their last meeting, and since then, they've been putting even more tariffs on each other. According to China's CCTV, the two countries' trade representatives spoke on the phone just hours ago and agreed that high-level officials would meet early next month in Washington, D.C. They also reportedly agreed to hold working-level talks before then to prepare. As we discussed a minute ago, the Federal Reserve said in its Beige Book report that the American economy is growing at a modest pace, similar to the evaluations made in June and July. Kim Yo-sun has the details.
The U.S. Federal Reserve says the country's economy is expanding at a modest pace. That's according to the Beige Book, which is a report on the U.S. economy based on reports from the Fed's 12 regional banks released on Wednesday. This is a similar evaluation as in June and July, and is in contrast to April's evaluation that said the economic activities grew at a slight to moderate pace. The report also explained that manufacturing was down slightly from the previous period. Despite the prolonged uncertainties over tariff and trade policies, the central bank said most U.S. businesses remain optimistic about their prospects. Meanwhile, the U.S. trade deficit narrowed slightly in July, according to the Commerce Department on Wednesday. It said U.S. exports increased in July to $207.4 billion, $1.2 billion more than in June, while imports dropped $400 million from the previous month to stand at $261.4 billion. Analysts say this is due to a decrease in demand for capital goods driven by America's sluggish manufacturing industry. Imports from China, the prime target of President Trump's trade offensive launched last year, fell 1.9% to $39 billion, the lowest level since April. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
The British Parliament's once again rebuffed Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The House of Commons approving a bill that would require legislative approval for a no-deal Brexit. That pushes the Brexit deadline to January 31st. Tory rebels on Wednesday ensured the bill passed by a margin of 28 votes. The bill will force Johnson to ask the EU for an extension beyond the October 31st deadline if there's no deal by then. The Prime Minister responded by calling for a general election, but lawmakers rejected his proposed date of October 15th. The European Commission on Wednesday also stepped up its preparations for a no deal with emergency funds to help businesses and workers hit by Brexit. Samsung Electronics held a forum in Tokyo on Wednesday on the chip-making business, and despite the trade tensions with Japan, it was bigger than last year. Called the Samsung Foundry Forum 2019 Japan, it was a chance for the South Korean chipmaker to showcase its technology portfolio and build ties with Japanese companies. It drew around 320 participants, a notable success considering the restrictions Japan's placed on companies like Samsung that have long relied on a few key Japanese exports. And that does it for this hour. Thank you for watching.